Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming today. Welcome to the CIBSE National FM Group and West Midlands CPD webinar on CIBSE Guide M Maintenance Engineering and Management. I am Natalie Atherton and I am part of the CIBSE's National FM Group, which exists as an identified need for a dedicated platform to seek stimulated interest and concentrated expertise from the regions to offer solutions to challenges faced by FM teams in the operational delivery of facilities, maintenance and management contracts. This group has been initiated with the grateful support of CIBSE West Midlands Region, and if we're successful, we seek to become autonomous, thus ensuring that subjects which you are interested in can be delivered to meet your development needs. So the CIBSE Facilities Management Group launched the updated CIBSE Guide M Maintenance Engineering Management on Thursday the 28th of September this year. Today you will hear from lead author Joanna Harris and Guide M chapter authors David Stevens, David Bleicher and Will Borden as they give you an overview of this comprehensive resource that delves it deep into the world of maintenance engineering, providing valuable insight and strategies for efficient facilities management. So Guide M is as you know, probably the go-to guide for facilities management industry. Everything that you need to know about operating building services is introduced and explained in this guide, and there's references to more in-depth resource within there as well. So our speakers today, Joanna Harris. Jo promotes, program manages and embeds best practice maintenance at Sodexo. She has a long history of working in the built environment that includes technical author of industry guidance, including the last two updates of CIBSE Guide M. Her areas of expertise are facilities management, asset management, project management, building service operations, building controls, maintenance strategy, statutory maintenance, well-being and building performance. She's passionate about closing the gap between construction and operations, delivering best practice maintenance and embracing technology to increase asset reliability and availability. David Bleicher, Publications Manager, BISRIA. He has a background in building services design with experience in the UK and the USA. He joined BISRIA in 2005 as a research engineer and currently manages BISRIA's programme of technical publications. David delivers training for BISRIA on topics such as legislation, building services and airtightness testing. And then we have David Stevens, who is Vice Chair and a Trustee Board Member of CIBSE. He started his career as an apprentice electrician prior to becoming a design engineer and has over 30 years experience in building services, design, construction, project management, operations and strategic maintenance planning. David specialises in operational aspects of the built environment with facilities management best practice, improved standards of engineering delivery and effective performance management across large property portfolios as his main areas of engineering focus, with a keen interest in soft landings and major project transition. David has worked in both the private and the public sector and is currently Director of Estates, Facilities and Capital Development for a large NHS trust. And then we have Will Borden. Will is a partner at Athethicom, providing expertise in asset data collection, management and lifecycle planning. He has 20 years experience of implementing asset management best practice across large and complex estates, ensuring value of asset data is maximised to achieve the right balance of cost, risk and performance. And we'd like to thank them and their colleagues and respective companies and organisations for all their help and support in today's event. Before we get into the presentations, I'd just like to cover a little bit of housekeeping. So please keep your cameras and microphones switched to inactive until you are ready to ask questions, which will be towards the end. But bear in mind that this is being recorded and will be shared on various social media platforms, including YouTube and our podcasts for people to catch up with at a later date. Alternatively, you can use the chat function to ask any questions. Someone will be reviewing those. And as I mentioned, we'll be doing the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. Please email please email cpd@cibsewm.org directly for a copy of the presentation slides after the event, and the same email address for CPD certificates stating your name, the subject of the event and the date, and they'll be emailed to you. That information will be put into the chat so that you can refer to it. So I'd also like to thank everybody for joining us for today's session, and also the speakers for their willingness to support us. But enough from me. I'm very keen on hearing what everybody else has got to say. So over to you, Jo.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nat. I wasn't expecting that big intro. Cool. I feel like I've done an awful lot. So let me start off with introducing the guide. I'm driving slides. So your agenda for today, I'm going to take you through an overview of what we did, how we did it, just touch on some of the other key subjects that have been updated that aren't covered by the extra speakers we've got here. So then David will take over legislation. Oh, I knew that would happen. Dave Stevens will talk commissioning and handover, and condition surveys and audits will be covered by Will. So we are recording, as Nat said. So I don't need to introduce myself because Nat's done that beautifully for me. But essentially work at Sodexo now, delivering best practice hard FM. Why do we? So Guide M, let's take the history. So I first got involved with Guide M back in 2014. For you that know CIBSE well, John Armstrong was the author of the original 2000 version, which was a guide to ownership and operation of maintenance and building services. We've updated it twice now. So this is the third edition, and we're ready for an update, almost 10 years old, and there have been a lot of changes in those 10 years. So things around well-being, with all our experiences around COVID, the legislation had changed a lot. So the Building Safety Act brought a lot of things for us to bring to your attention. Lots of stuff around training and professional competence. When you think about what happened at Grenfell and all the activities that have happened since then. Our energy, the focus when the prices started rising, and climate change and everything else got involved, and net zero is our focus for facilities managers. They're the group that can do the most, make the most impact on net zero. And then controls. Within 10 years, technology has moved on enormously. So that was a driving factor for updating this guide. This whole guide was done by volunteers. I'm not even a member of CIBSE, but I'm a member of the CIBSE FM group and have been for many years. So we're all volunteers, everyone you see here. We each took a part. So we had an open call out to the industry, driven through the CIBSE networks for contributions. I sort of called on people that I knew as experts in their field, including the three sitting in front of you now. And we needed to make sure that they were willing and committed. It's no easy task taking on something like this. So you can see on the right hand side, there are 16 chapters or parts, as CIBSE has now called them. And each one of those had a lead author and contributors as well. So huge thank you to all of those people, because it wouldn't have happened without them. So if I talk about a few chapters just quickly before I hand over, we had the energy and carbon. It's a complete rewrite of that section. We talk about using the word carbon, how it should be used, what carbon really means, the energy policy that you need to be putting in place if you haven't got one already, understanding what energy is and how it's used, and making the point about how to meter. We talk about energy management systems, and new for this guide is guiding FMs to what is low carbon and renewable systems. We all need to be thinking about net zero, and this will be your first port of call. In the operation and maintenance manuals, obviously, you know, hard copies, PDFs, long gone. We really don't want those anymore. So this is talking about using technology, following through with the BIM through process, making sure your statutory documentation and your test certification is up to date and in the right place, so you can evidence what you've done, important parts for FM. Then the controls section, that was completely rewritten. Over 10 years, the industry's moved on. John did a great job of making it, simplifying it. Got a great diagram there that is trying to uncomplicate it. You know, controls can be complicated, but they don't need to be difficult to use. And the industry, the controls industry, has got a bit of a bad reputation in FM. And there's too many FMs out there that don't touch controls because they think it's too complicated. The key now is to drive and make sure that you have a description of operations, which is a Word document that is in real language, in real English, that anyone can understand. And John's passion comes through in this chapter about engaging and making people feeling confident to operate and deliver controls in the best way. The controls industry, if you like, has created a professional certification scheme and training scheme, and John talks about that in this chapter. And it's about making sure that we grow and be confident in the way we manage our controls. Our buildings are smarter and getting smarter than us. So we need to grow with that and make sure we keep up with technology changes. And then Greg Davis did a great rewrite of the risk assessment and risk management chapter, talking about maintainers of buildings that have that unique insight into why and how and the way that buildings operate. So we have that key responsibility to identify and control all the risks. The risks it talks about are on the right hand side, as you can see. Won't go through those, but any risk, you know, we are FMs, operators are in control of what happens in those buildings, and it's risks that present damage, injury, liability, loss, all those negative occurrences. That's what we need to be focusing on, and that's what we need to be managing. So Greg gives you a great insight into how to do that. And then the last one, maybe one more, life cycle. So CIBSE Guide M is the only place you can find expected life for asset types, building services assets. So this chapter has been thoroughly rewritten as well. It's one of the last ones to be finished. There's more examples about how to use the economic factors. So you can't just say, okay, a boiler has 15 years. You have to actually work out how it's been used, where it's been operated, how it's been looked after, what quality of manufacture it was in the first place. And this chapter will take you through everything you need to know to manage that sort of life cycle and asset replacement process. And then well-being definitely is my last one, I think. So obviously with COVID, we learned a lot more about ventilation, air quality, and what makes people tick. Over the last 10 years, BREEAM in use, the WELL certificate have all come out. So this subject has just been rewritten. These are just snippets of all the things that you need to know in FM. So every one of those has got some high level information and then resources for you to go and find out more in-depth stuff if you need to. Okay, David, would you like to take over?
Okay, thank you very much, Jo. And thanks everyone for joining us. We've got lots of people listening, which is fantastic. So Natalie's already introduced me, so I'm not going to say much about myself, other than that my job is to edit and publish the BISRIA publications, but as you can see, I get involved with other publications as well. So I was very pleased to be asked to help out with CIBSE Guide M. I should say I'm not the author of section 14, but I was helping out the author, Jacqueline. So I'm going to start out with just some sort of general information about legislation before talking about the actual guide. So this is how I see the structure of legislation in the UK, and this is how we try to explain it in CIBSE Guide M. So at the top, you've got these Acts of Parliament. So these are the things that actually have to get debated in Parliament and then pass and receive royal assent. So it's things like the Health and Safety at Work Act that give the overall framework for legislation. Now, within those Acts of Parliament, there's not a whole lot in there that actually tells us what to do. Mostly, it gives a legal framework and it gives powers to government departments. And then the government departments bring out secondary legislation. The secondary legislation are the regulations that we do have to comply with. Things like, I don't know, pressure system safety regulations or the building regulations. Those are the legal requirements that we really have to follow. I should mention here that as well as parliamentary legislation driving the secondary legislation that we have to comply with, a lot of legislation that we have now was influenced by EU directives. Now, obviously, you know, the UK doesn't need to follow EU directives anymore, but there's still plenty of legislation on our books that at the time it came out was at least partly influenced by EU directives, as well as our own government's policy and the Acts of Parliament. Also, in the case of some legislation, the UK is still following in the same direction as the EU. For example, the UK F-gas regulations are, at least at the present time, in line with the EU F-gas regulations. Of course, I can't promise that that'll happen in the future. We might see some deviation in there. Ultimately, regulations are really only any good if they're enforced. You know, there's lots of regulations that are on our books that are totally ignored because there's no enforcement mechanism. Nobody's making you follow them. For most of the regulations, sorry, I shouldn't say most of the regulations, but the regulations that we're all familiar with in building services, these do have enforcement mechanisms quite often through the HSE, but sometimes through other bodies as well. Now, these regulations that we've got to comply with, quite often the requirements in those regulations are what I would call top level or overarching. The technical detail is very often in approved codes of practice or guidance documents. And sometimes it's not even in those. Sometimes it is in other documents that are referred to in approved code of practice or referred to in government guidance documents. So those might be British standards, European standards, even CIBSE guides or BISRIA guides. And the last thing I'll mention on this slide is that the legislation is different in different parts of the UK. Now, the good news is most of the important stuff, most of the health and safety stuff is UK-wide. It's just that some of the other things are different in different countries. So, for example, you might have a regulation that is England and Wales, and another one that is maybe England and Wales and Northern Ireland, but not Scotland. So whenever you look at legislation, you always need to look at what are the regional differences. Do I need to do something a little bit different in a different part of the UK? So moving on from that, I want to talk about why we've got legislation in the first place. Well, most of it is health and safety. So preventing things like what's happening in this picture. By the way, I didn't take this picture. I don't even know if it's real or just, you know, CGI or something. Obviously, this is a situation in which there isn't a safe system of work in place. So all of the legislation that we have is there for a reason, that there has been an issue that has needed to be addressed at government level. And that issue might have been at some point in the past a high rate of accidents in a particular area, possibly even somebody dying as a result of a bad practice in the industry. But remember, it's not all health and safety. There's stuff for energy efficiency as well as various energy efficiency legislation, because that is seen to be an issue that that needs to be addressed at government level. It can't just be left up to individual organisations to do as they please in that regard. Likewise, environmental protection. So things like the F-gas regulations, but also lots of things to do with waste, to do with emissions into the environment. Those are covered by legislation. Also, some is to do with equality. We have the Equality Act that is an act of Parliament. We also have things like Part M of the building regulations that are related to equality. Now, I'm not going to pretend that these provide absolute equality for everybody, but they go a certain distance in providing equality. I mentioned security here because this is only a very tiny thing. There's one tiny little bit in the building regulations about secure door and window sets in dwellings, and that's it. Which kind of brings me on to the next thing, which is, what does legislation not cover? So what we need to remember, legislation is there only in areas where government has seen fit to bring out legislation. So there's no legislation saying that we have to run our projects to programme and to budget. That is not a public issue. It's not the government's problem if our projects aren't running smoothly. We need to have our contracts in place to do that sort of thing. Likewise, making workplaces effective and productive. That is essentially what we are all here for as facilities managers and as maintenance engineers. But actually, there's no legislation forcing us to do those things. The legislation forces us to do things safely and in some cases efficiently. And ultimately, maintaining assets to be reliable and cost effective, that is, that is the building owner's problem. They need their procedures and contracts in place to make sure that happens, even if the regulations aren't telling them to do that. Okay, so I'll talk now a little bit about CIBSE Guide M14. So what we've tried to do in this update is, for each piece of legislation, first of all, talk about what is the enabling legislation. So for most of it, because it's health and safety, it falls under the Health and Safety at Work Act. In the case of building regulations, this falls under the Building Act. Then there is the Building Safety Act. That's a relatively recent act of Parliament. That was only last year, and we're now starting to see secondary legislation coming out of the Building Safety Act. We're starting to see changes to the building regulations as a result of the Building Safety Act. A lot of this stuff in the Building Safety Act is focused on higher risk buildings, which is residential buildings of, and I'm going off the top of my head here, 7 stories or more. And also including hospitals and care homes. So it doesn't affect all buildings. Having said that, the Building Safety Act itself has much more wide-ranging implications than just the higher risk buildings. So then onto the secondary legislation, we talk about the building regulations. We talk about CDM, which is, I should clarify here, a lot of people think CDM, it's just about big projects. No, it isn't. It can apply to some very small projects as well. And a lot of people say, oh, CDM, that's just about health and safety on site. No, it isn't. It's about health and safety of that building for its entire life cycle. So that somebody who has designer responsibilities under CDM, they're not only responsible for making sure that it can be constructed safely, that building then has to be used and maintained safely. So they're responsible for your safety when you're maintaining the buildings, and even right down the lines of people who are going to be dismantling and demolishing that building. Also, COSH, control of substances hazardous to health. I always have difficulty saying that. Legionella falls under COSH. Legionella bacteria are considered to be a substance hazardous to health. So there's a whole load of guidance that we've explained in CIBSE Guide M14 relating to Legionella. Then there's the F-gas regulations. That is to do with environmental protection rather than energy efficiency or rather than health and safety. It's about making sure that we don't cause global warming emissions as a result of fluorinated greenhouse gases leaking from systems such as refrigeration systems. Some of these gases that we have in our refrigeration systems are many thousands of times more potent than CO2. as greenhouse gases. But what we're seeing is some of the more potent ones are being phased down, and some of the ones that we've been using for years, we might not be able to use at all within the next few years. We have to wait and see what's going to happen with the next phase of F-gas regulations. Then there's the water regulations. That's kind of to do with health and safety, but also to do with not wasting water, not misusing water. Interestingly enough, though, those aren't under the Health and Safety at Work Act. They're the water regulations. The overall framework for that is actually the Water Industry Act that privatised the water industry back in the 90s. So it covers things like backflow prevention and all of the equipment that you need on a cold water storage tank, which is what I've got in the picture here. Anyway, there's lots of other legislation. We've gone into quite a lot of detail on it on M14, but I'm not going to go into more detail on this slide. So yeah, obviously there's a lot of sources of information for this stuff. So yes, definitely CIBSE Guide M14, have a look at that. It references a lot of other sources too. For example, the HSE publishes most of the health and safety related approved codes of practice and guidance documents. For example, I've shown you L56, which is the one on gas safety, and that's actually an approved code of practice and guidance document in one. I've also shown you here the water regulations guide. This is a bit of a funny one. It provides industry guidance and government guidance on the water regulations, but it's only available as a hard copy. That's why you see the picture that I've got there is just a scan of the front cover. You can't get it as a PDF, unfortunately. And then I've shown you one of the building regulations approved documents that provides guidance on ways of meeting the building regulations. So a few websites I've given you here. Legislation.gov.uk shows you the legislation with no context whatsoever, just the legal text and nothing else. Very useful in certain circumstances. HSE have a lot of information on their website and a lot of downloads of approved codes of practice and guidance documents. The next website I've given you there is for the building regulations approved documents. Those are the ones for England. There are different ones for Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Then there's the government guidance on F-gas regulations. That is just straight on their website. It's just HTML. There's no downloadable PDF or book or anything like that. And the last one is Water Regs UK. They publish that water regulations guide and have some good guidance on the website itself. So there's a couple of additional resources I'd like to mention now. First of all, BG80. So apologies here for doing a plug for a BISRIA publication on a CIBSE webinar, but it is something that you might find useful. I've updated it this year. I might do another update next year, depending on how many regulation changes you see. Really, all it is, it's a big spreadsheet that lists tasks that need to be done under legislation or under the supporting approved codes of practice or under supporting guidance document. Tells you what the task is, how often it needs to be done, what skill level is needed for that task, and what recording is required for that task. Then there's SFG20. SFG20, I should clarify, something much bigger than BG80. It's not just looking at tasks required under legislation. It's looking at the much wider picture of maintenance management. It's basically a big database of maintenance tasks. And it's a piece of software in its own right that you can use to manage maintenance rather than just find out the raw data about it. So just a few thank yous before I finish and hand over to the next person. So first of all, big thank you to Jacqueline. She couldn't make it to today's presentation. She was the lead author of section 14. It was a mammoth task. It did involve a lot of people, and these are the names of the contributors and peer reviewers who helped us make sure that we get all of the right information in here that is relevant to building services. We did have to be selective in some cases of saying, do we really need every tiny little bit of legislation? And for the legislation that we did put in there, how much detail do we need to give about the legislation and its supporting approved codes of practice and guidance? So that's it for me. Thank you very much. And back to you, Joe.
Okay, just a straight hand over to Dave Stevens.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, David, and thanks everybody. it doesn't give me a button to take control, so I don't know if anybody moves the slides on. But if you can, move it on, please, whoever's got control. There we go, that'll do, so we can stay on that one for a while. So hi all, especially those that have just recently joined. I'm David Stevens. I'm Vice Chair of the CIBSE FM group, and along with the other presenters on the call, we're involved in the writing of Guide M. Hopefully, we only do this every 10 years or so, because it was a bit of a mammoth task, but thoroughly enjoyable. So talking about commissioning and testing. So I think, first of all, to note that this is by far not my area of expertise, and generally isn't most people's area of expertise. I think it's the one area of design, construction and handover that probably has the least amount of knowledge and the most amount of impact. So we had James Campbell, Adam Muggleton, Neil Burdas, Joe Pitt and Lee Robert Smith pulling this together with us. And chapter 7 is about commissioning and testing, and it provides that holistic overview. It discusses the scope of a commissioning specialist's work and the commissioning manager's area of involvement, and how it all links to building performance and energy efficiency. And I might mention this a couple of times, with the whole document, all of the chapters, it's been written to assist both hard and soft FM practitioners, as well as designers and project managers. And it's designed for anybody to be able to have this accessible on their virtual or real desktop. I wouldn't recommend buying it in a paper format. I've got it here. It's a plethora of little tiny books, but if that's your preference, by all means have it that way. It's a lot better to be able to search it as a PDF document. So as I said at the beginning, commissioning is generally not well understood by those outside of it. And commissioning is often sacrificed and compressed, which is clearly detriment to building performance and energy usage. So that's why we've produced this document, to give the slightly less uneducated like myself an ability to understand what the processes and procedures are. And therefore, we've got checklists. We identify the need for comprehensive record keeping, and I'll touch on that in another chapter as well, as is the need to be able to keep our records updated throughout the life of a building. We've got a designer's checklist in there for commissioning, and it's provided along with other guidance for how you would decommission and mothball an installation, which is of extremely valuable use to FMs out there. And then when you combine all of this with part 7, it provides an insight how to get the very, very best from the entire project team, which includes the FM during the project stages, during those commissioning stages. It links to other documents, so you don't need to have to do that. So it links to all of the CIBSE commissioning codes, especially the most recent one, Commissioning Management 2022. And as we've just heard about from BSRIA there, it links to BSRIA BG8 2009, and that includes that model commissioning plan. And that document provides guidance and a template for commissioning plans. The chapter itself really does emphasize the need for a commissioning manager. And regardless of the size of your project, depends to what extent, but the commissioning manager needs to work alongside the MEP design consultant. Now, they can be directly appointed by the client or the main contractor. Often they're appointed by the M&E contractor, which isn't ideal, and we would discourage that. But if that's the only mechanism for appointment, then that should still be done. The next slide, 6.1. Whoever's got control of the slides there. There we go. So that's that indicative commissioning activity and roles for each project stage. I get it's really too small to see on this slide. I'm sure you can zoom if you want to look at it. But what it does is it talks you through each of the stages and who is responsible for leading it and who is responsible for supporting it. So hopefully for the uneducated like me, it's a useful toolbox for commissioning. So the next slide takes us into, that was a lot faster, takes us into handover procedures. Now, this I know enough about. So this was led by myself, James Campbell and Adam Muggleton again. So already you can see that inherent link back to commissioning. And there's lots of things we emphasize throughout that. One of the things we wanted to talk about in the chapter was the recording of training sessions. Now that's becoming more and more commonplace, but to have your training sessions recorded, how to operate key items of plant recorded and saved via YouTube or SharePoint and via clickable links or via QR codes. So throughout the life of the building, you've got the direct access to the people providing that advice would be fantastic. We're starting to do it on a number of our projects now. Now, I suppose if you look at some of those in 30 years, you're going to see fashions are going to change, but the technical content will still be there. We talk about the information required for handover, and of course we mentioned the Building Safety Act and how that requires information around building safety to be provided, and it was referred to as the golden thread. I'm sure everybody on the call now has heard about that, and that intent is to provide that robust golden thread of information across to future owners of a building and to underpin more effective safety management throughout the whole cycle of the building. Now, we acknowledge that the golden thread may not be statutory for all buildings. In fact, it's not statutory for all HRBs. Only those HRBs in use, which means hospitals and healthcare, are excluded from the need for a golden thread in operation. But it's best practice, and this is what this document is about talking about best practice and what we can all do as an industry to provide the best for our buildings, the best operation, the best energy efficiency, and the best performance. So we talk about soft landings in this chapter. Soft landings is emphatically not about handover, but we had to put the chapter somewhere, so this is where it had to go. So soft landings are strategies to help FMs and occupiers, and it encourages engagement with the design and construction to ensure that smooth operational performance. Now, even if you don't have a regimented soft landings process, depending on the size and scale of your building or your project, following the principles of soft landings is still a highly effective way to ensure that projects are completed with operations in mind. And I would encourage the designers and the project managers on this call to make sure that you do have FMs appointed to the design team. Now, not all projects and clients are going to have FMs. And with some types of building, you won't even know who the overall occupier or end client could be. So therefore, you may not have that in-house or externally appointed FM. So we would really encourage good quality design teams to be appointing a representative to act on behalf of the project's eventual occupiers. We don't need to know who they are to have a good understanding about how that building will operate. And we are specialists. We do have that understanding. So please do appoint somebody to act on that behalf. Even if you're appointing somebody within your own design teams that is an operational champion, that could be a graduate or a junior member of staff or an apprentice whose role on the project is to always be considering and challenging how will this building operate. But the early engagement of an FM will reduce the risk of long-term poor performance of facilities, and of course the associated cost implications. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted here, but if we know how our buildings are going to operate, they are going to be more energy efficient. We talk about building user guides, which are very, very different to O&M manuals, and those are guides written from a non-engineering perspective for the use of the non-technical user. If you can be so minded, Google UCL Estates building user guide, and you'll find an example on their website of one we created when I was there, which is a fantastic building user guide. And it's open, take it, copy it, use it on your own projects. But that's what's given to people who are living and breathing the building on a daily basis, not the maintainers, but the people that will actually be in there. It should include items on accessibility, inclusivity, operational functions to ensure safe, secure and effective use. So do have a look at that guide if you can. And everything that we do, everything we talk about in this chapter should be optimizing operational efficiency. And it should be written in a non-technical language. So the next slide talks about post-project evaluation and post-occupancy evaluation. Now, this is brand new for the guide. It's the first time we've included it, and it shows what you can and you should be including in a post-project review. Now, every project we argue and we talk about in the chapter should have a post-project review. Now, that could be at various scale, various levels of depth, various levels of scope, depending on the size, value and criticality of your project. It could be a very low value project that has immense criticality for a business. So therefore, you should obviously be doing a full post-project review. So this slide kind of talks about what aspects of the PPR you would want to be considering. When I was at UCL, our post-project evaluations were only carried out on buildings over 10 million. But you might choose to do a post-occupancy evaluation on much lower values, depending upon the size and scale of the projects that you have, because a proper POE, including building user service guides, will be expensive. So you want to make sure that you're only doing it on the right value and right scale of your property. The next slide, which is my last slide, you'll be pleased to hear. Again, I appreciate you cannot read this. This is just to give you an indication of what's there. This is a handover checklist. So this can be used for FMs. It can be used for designers. It can be used for project managers, for everything that you should be considering as a project often hurtles towards handover. So hopefully we've not missed anything, but please do download at least this chapter of the guide if you've got any involvement in building services, because it will be a fantastic guide for what should be provided at handover. So I'm going to hand back now to Joe. I'll hang around for questions at the end, and thank you for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you, David. So straight on to Will. You have just over 15 minutes left.
Okay. So I was lead author on the audits and engineering condition surveys chapters of CIBSE Guide M, supported by Gordon Pringle, David Smith and Tom Boland. And I'm going to talk to you today about how we ensure we're delivering a service that meets our clients' expectations, as well as how to assess the condition of our buildings to optimise the balance of cost, risk and performance. So what are we trying to achieve in FM? I guess essentially we're aiming to provide warm, dry buildings where the lights are working, the lifts are going up and down, and everybody in the building's happy. So that should be fairly straightforward, you'd think. But in the context of the day-to-day challenges of FM, sort of cost cutting, reduced staff, aging buildings, skill shortages, net zero, all these challenges that FMs face on a day-to-day, it's not so straightforward to deliver simple things. So we need some structure. So firstly, we need to understand the expectations of our clients. So that's normally encompassed within a contract or a service level agreement. That defines the scope of the things that are going to be provided, KPIs, maintenance standards, those sorts of things. And then what we need to do is deliver that service. So we need three components to do that. We need people, systems, and processes. And they all need to be working together in a coordinated way. So we need the people to deliver the work, the processes to tell us how to do that, and then the systems to issue and document the work. So all being well, everyone will be following the processes. Systems will be configured correctly. People will be trained. They'll remember what they were told in the training. Everything works smoothly. But it doesn't always happen like that. And the purpose of an audit is to assess the service, identify any shortfalls, and then to address them. So how do you do an audit? First, you need to determine the scope. So it could be a broad audit across the whole FM service that's being delivered, or it could be a really narrow and deep audit of a particular element, like the CAFM system or statutory compliance or the help desk. You need to determine the approach, so whether it's an in-person audit or a remote audit. You need to plan the audit questions. So those questions need to identify where the issues might be. So they need to dig deep enough to actually extract any issues that might be underlying there. You need to schedule the audit, make sure everyone's available to attend, conduct the audit, and then document the findings and report on those findings. And then where there are shortfalls, you need to assign owners to those actions and follow up on those actions to make sure they've been completed. So it's essentially using the plan, do, check, act cycle of continuous improvement to check what's being done and then act on it where there are shortfalls. So as I mentioned, an audit can cover any specific area of the service or the entire service. Key areas that are typically examined are the asset register integrity, evidence of statutory maintenance, safe systems of work, performance to SLAs, those sorts of things. And as I said earlier, it's really important that the questions that are asked in the audit dig below the surface to make sure that things are evidenced correctly, and you're not just taking people's word for something that that something's been done or something's been completed correctly. So an example of that might be when we're looking at statutory compliance. So we could take a PPM report out of a system, and that might tell us that everything's complete. All of those statutory tasks have been completed. But that's just one element of the all of the components that are needed to demonstrate compliance. So in that graphic there, you can see there's 6 elements there looking at whether we've got correct and complete asset register, so we understand what the assets are that we're supposed to be maintaining, the frequency of those tasks and the next due dates, whether it's been completed, evidence and documented, and whether there are any remedial works and whether those have been delivered and evidenced as well. So to summarize, we're aiming to deliver a service that meets our clients' expectations. That's the contract. We need people, systems and processes working together to deliver that expected outcome. And an audit is simply validating that those things are happening. Don't think of an audit as a annoying, bureaucratic, unnecessary exercise, but try to think of it as a way to keep you on track to deliver an excellent service to your end users. Next slide, please. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about why condition surveys are so important to collect the data that we need to make good operational and strategic decisions. I mentioned at the start, what we're trying to do is provide safe, warm, dry buildings where the lights are working and the lifts are going up and down. So we do that by maintaining our assets in the operational phase. But as those assets age and wear, it becomes more economical to replace those assets than to keep maintaining them. So what we're trying to do is establish how long it'll be until those assets are likely to fail. So we want the asset to achieve its useful life, but we want to plan for the replacement of those assets before they actually start to fail and impact end users. So it's advantageous for us to plan for asset replacement rather than replacing assets reactively, because it's more cost effective to do a planned replacement. It's less disruptive. We can spend the time designing it correctly and commissioning it properly, and ultimately we get a better end result. So that's why we want to plan for replacement. But establishing the remaining life of an asset can be quite challenging because there are so many influencing factors, and we can never be entirely accurate. We can never say exactly when something is going to fail, but we can estimate. So what we look at is some of the influencing factors, like environmental conditions that the asset's working in, the run hours, the design, the level of maintenance it's receiving, those sorts of things. You can imagine in a building, in a busy building, you've got a lift, for example, in a central core, might be going up and down hundreds of times a day, but then you might have a lift of a similar age at the back of the building that's just used by the cleaners to take the bins out twice a day. So those lifts, although they might be the same specification and the same age, they're going to wear at different rates. So we might need to look at that and try and plan for replacement at different times. Next slide, please, Joe. When you're planning a condition survey, you need to make sure that you're collecting data in a consistent and standardized way. So using pen and paper is going to be difficult to achieve that. So try and move towards a more digital capture method to collect our information. Then we can use data classification methods like standard hierarchies, thinking about NRM3, Uniclass, those types of things that help us to get consistent data standards that we can report on at different levels of granularity. We can group assets together for project planning and procurements, aggregate data from different buildings, different surveys. You know, if we're using a common data language, then we can aggregate that data easily, and then use that data to correspond with other data sets and standards, sort of interoperability between data. So if we collect the right information and we understand what needs replacing, when it needs replacing, where it's located, and how much it's going to cost, then we can get a full understanding of what our life cycle liabilities are going to be over the next few years. And you can see that in the life cycle profile there. But quite often the case that there's insufficient budget to address everything. So we need to incorporate criticality and priority to try and dissect those liabilities and sort of take into consideration the impacts of failure. So what we want to do is make sure that we're spending our limited budget on the things that are most important to us. So what's important for one building might not be the same as another building. So take, for example, a prison. Security assets are going to be really important for a prison. So they're highly critical. So we want to be addressing those. But for a hotel, maybe the decorations and the aesthetics are more important. So we need to sort of assess criticality, and it'll be different for different buildings, different clients. So you can see how planning and executing a good condition survey will enable you to get to data-led decisions that will help you balance the cost, risk, and performance of your buildings. Then we can use that to help meet our client expectations in delivering safe, warm, dry buildings, keep the lights on, and keep the lifts going up and down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. I think everybody's passion for their topic areas really came across there. The whole of the Guide M is obviously relevant to FM, so it's really great to have that additional information. But one of the things that really stuck out for me was the project review process. Having just completed an exercise yesterday where we reviewed an 8-year project, there wasn't a lot of that structure that was included in our review discussion. So it's really great to know that where we can improve going forward. So I just wanted to plug some future events for the CIBSE West Midlands group. Tomorrow there is a water pressure control in tall buildings event. On Tuesday the 9th of January, competence, how to demonstrate competency. And the Tuesday the 13th of February. Listen all you ever wanted to know about them, but never dared ask. So I've seen that quite a lot of you have already joined the LinkedIn group. That is further details further up in the chat if you want to join that. You can also sign up to the Eventbrite details, which again are in the chat, along with the YouTube channel and the details for any feedback that you've got or for a CPD certificate. So I'd just like to again thank everybody for joining us today, especially our speakers, Joe, David, Will, and we look forward to meeting you and welcoming you to another CIBSE National FM Group event in the near future. So at this point, I think we've only got one question in the chat, which was asked by Mr. Gathergood. Now that all of, I've hovered over the thing and I can't read it. Now that all of the lead authors and contributors have completed the long-awaited update to Guide M, what is next?
Well, I can only talk for myself. I've got a few fingers in pies. There is plans to update the Knowledge Series 21, which is a CIBSE document around competency frameworks. So that's already started. And I'm collaborating along with David Blancher in an IWFM document where they are trying to push to have a standard industry definition for statutory maintenance. I don't know if anybody works with SFG20, you'll understand that sometimes what they think is statutory isn't quite what David and I might think is statutory. So we've got a working group, the IWFM are hosting it in their procurement team. So we're working on that one. Can't think of anything else.
Any of the other speakers working on anything that they want to share?
Oh, I might need to find some more volunteers then, won't I?
Very possibly, very possibly. I just want to point out that the gentleman that's asked the question is also one of the part authors, so feel free to say what you're going to be working on next, Steve.
Oh, Steve's already roped into the key stage, a Knowledge Series 21.
Very good, very good. Okay, and we have got a couple of questions. So the next one, what, in the panel's opinion, are the priority issues that CIBSE believes are missing or for which current guidance is lacking that needs to be addressed to achieve the collective goal of operating our buildings efficiently and effectively?
I don't think there is anything missing. If you pick up Guide M, you'll get a good grounding on the subject. Yeah. And then you can use some of the other CIBSE guides. So can't remember the numbers or the letters anymore, but there's an energy efficiency guide that's been totally rewritten in the last 2 years, I think. So, you know, there is no reason why you shouldn't be operating efficiently and effectively. There's enough guidance out there. Sorry.
It's good to know that it's there, and hopefully your answers will signpost anybody if they weren't already aware of those aspects. One of the presenters, apologies I don't remember who, mentioned a good example of a building user guide and mentioned something to Google. What was it? So it was one of the Davids, I believe.
I've put it in the chat. The link's there in the chat, so you can download it.
Fabulous, thank you very much, because that was one of the things that I was thinking that I would want to follow up on. Thanks for that. And we have got another question. Does this Guide M reference CIBSE Code M on commissioning management, as they seem heavily linked and co-supportive?
It does, and I was one of the authors on Code M. So we've made sure there's a heavy linking. And with that, I need to dive off for another meeting. So any more questions, I'll leave with others.
Thank you very much for coming.
The answer is yes.
We have got a few more questions for those that are able to stay on the call for a little while. So do we know if CIBSE Guide A or Guide M will help clarify new building regulation Part F and Part O ventilation and overheating?
Did David drop off?
Hello. Yes, I just put an answer in the box for that
All
one.
right.
I was on the steering group for CIBSE Code A, and yes, it does mention Part F of the building regulations. Not sure whether it will address the specific concerns that you have about Part F. I don't think it mentions Part O though, because but by and large, Part O is houses, flats, care homes, student halls. So by and large, we're talking about buildings that don't have mechanical ventilation. So for the most part, compliance with Part O is done through openable windows.
Fabulous. Is there an automatic tool available for calculating economic life variable factors when completing life cycle?
Right. So the bit I've glossed over is that the life tables haven't been published yet. They are being worked on. They've been a long time coming, and we actually had to publish the guide because we were waiting too long. But in the new version, the Excel, we're going to produce it in Excel, and it will have a tool and some worked examples to be able to show you how to use those factors, hopefully more wisely.
And do we know when we're expecting that?
Oh, that's a toughie.
Sorry.
After Christmas, let's go with that.
Right, okay. So a little while yet. Thank you. So then I think this might be the last question, unless anybody wants to come off mute and converse with us. Many FMs these days do not come from a technical background, and whilst Guide M provides a wealth of guidance on technical aspects of maintenance, engineering and management, do the panel believe that CIBSE goes far enough with regards to the personal and behavioural qualities, human factors, such as accountability, creativity, delegation, empathy, etc.?
Don't think the CIBSE guide covers that, to be fair.
No.
We're all a bunch of engineers, so in our defence, I think we've written it as engineers.
Yeah. Focusing on the technical content.
Yeah. There might be some, I'm going to say it, fluffy IWFM documents that provide that for you. Best practice in FM. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay, is there anyone on the call that wants to ask a question that hasn't already done so? Okay, thank you very much. Again, thank you to our speakers, and thank you very much to everybody that's attended and interacted with the content and questions. As detailed, we are hoping to organise another FM related CPD session in the imminent future. As yet, we don't have a date, but keep your eyes peeled on the LinkedIn group. Thank you very much. See you soon.
Thanks, Nat. Thanks, guys.